So Lonna Babu is taking us back into the realm of, well, I suppose the last thesis was about healing in a more spiritual and more complete way. And Lonna is going to take us again to this topic of healing and creating a safe space. Lonna's thesis committee was comprised of Peter Noonan, who's the chair over here, myself, Professor Eisenbach, Ronit Eisenbach over there, and Lonna, change her name now.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on today. Lonna had a professional mentor, Tom Ziegenfuss, an alum of our program, principal at Design Collective. Unfortunately, at the very last, just about a half hour ago, we got an email from Tom saying he's not going to be able to make it here today, but he's here in spirit, and we'll send him a videotape of what it was all like. It's all yours.
all right, thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the people that helped make this possible. First and foremost, to my committee, my mentor, and especially my thesis chair, Professor Noonan. Thank you for your continued guidance, your support, your encouragement, for helping me look at this project and design in different ways with every conversation that we've had. To my family, my parents, and my two sisters for being the best support system, especially in the most stressful times. And for all my friends that are here today for helping keep me relatively sane this whole year. And so with that, I'd like to present to you Safe Space, Architectural Sequence as a Healing Experience. This is a thesis that questions how can we design architecture as not just a place for recovery, but as a part of the healing process for trauma victims. Sex trafficking is a part of the second largest crime in the world, with over 4.5 million victims to its name today. It is a massively global issue, with victims being taken away from their families, their homes, their native cultures, everything that they know and love, across international waters to foreign lands. It's a national issue with a huge emphasis along the East Coast, as we have major airports, ports, and highways that allow for easy transportation at all times. And it's a crime in this very state, with Baltimore as an emerging hotspot for it, as the I-95 corridor runs right through it, allowing traffickers to transport their victims to any of the major cities along the East Coast in under 3 hours. Apart from being taken away from everything that these young girls and women know and love, they are forced to go through the unthinkable every single day. One survivor in Baltimore discussed being used by her trafficker 8 times a day. This means that she was being raped by 8 different people every single day. That is 56 times in 1 week and 2,920 times in 1 year. And that was just one girl's reality. These are young girls and women who become prone and vulnerable to the trafficking life because they come from a childhood of trauma. They come from a childhood where they never had the opportunity to be children. They come from broken homes, a history of sexual abuse, a history of neglect, all of which makes them easier prey for traffickers who can lure them into the trafficking life by giving them the false hope that they're going to help make their lives better. And in that life, the trafficker's main goal is to create a willing victim. And he does this by grooming her. He constantly moves her from location to location to disorient her. He pulls her away from any remaining social network that she has. He tortures her, beating her, starving her, raping her, forcing her to use drugs and alcohol until she eventually breaks. And she is reshaped into a dehumanized commodity. And this is more than just a simple mental change, but this completely changes the way in which these young women and girls see the world, see each other, and see themselves. This is also a very physical change. You can see the very tangible essence of pain that changes over the course of these girls' lives along this continuum of trauma. So how can we take this understanding, this idea that these girls have been conditioned to see the world in a completely distorted way, and design a new normal for them? This thesis intervention lies in the 90 days after a girl has been rescued or has escaped. In the first 90 days, she would be in a safe house, filled with law enforcement, social workers, people that are there to physically make her feel safe, check her medical and behavioral stability, and at the end of the day, give her the opportunity to choose to proceed with healing. And once she has done that, if she has done that, she would transition into this shelter, a place where she would stay for anywhere from 1 to 2 years, and in that time, we're able to use architecture as the medium in which to rewrite the narrative of these girls' lives that has been a continuum of trauma, and reclaim, reverse, and restore the things that have been distorted in their lives as being normal, and prepare them for further independence beyond the walls of the shelter. These are young girls and women who have been thrown into a lifetime of trauma through no fault of their own. And yet, even when they have left that life, they are left branded and stigmatized by it, especially being women of a sexual trauma. And instead of seeing these people for who they really are, young women who are in pain, who are terrified, who might not have any idea what's happening to them, much less why this is happening to them, we put them into spaces that tell them that somehow it was their fault, that somehow it was their choice and they deserve to be punished for it. Or in trying to help them, we put them into this little box filled with 100 different people who have their own stories, their own pain, and we hope that this little institutional box becomes this one solution fix to all of their pain. And in actually extracting these traumas and treating them for their own, we go to two extremes. On one end, we're isolating these girls so far from the realm of the public that we're telling them that somehow they're deficient and not quite right. Or we try a little bit too hard to put them back into society by putting them into housing typologies that have been retrofitted with the program of a shelter, but not designed specifically for them and their needs. This thesis proposes a way that we can find a balance between these two and stitch girls back into the fabric of a community, of everyday life, and by doing that, destigmatize girls not only from others, but from themselves as well. And that starts at the urban scale. The site is Baltimore City, and by mapping out public green space, educational institutions, healthcare, social work institutions, and police stations, we come to the neighborhood of this thesis in Greenmount West, a neighborhood lying about 1.5 miles north of the Inner Harbor, but more importantly, it lies in the center of this larger network of institutions that we've created in order to activate the city in the healing process as well. The neighborhood of Greenmount West is one of 3 neighborhoods that make up Baltimore's Arts and Entertainment District of Station North. This is a neighborhood that's also going through its own transition in an effort to become a more diverse, more inclusive, more welcoming community through the efforts of those that are already there and the new people that will come in, especially artists. And so integrated throughout this neighborhood, you'll see community green space. These are children's playgrounds, community gardens, parks, community gathering spaces, places where these neighbors come together to have an active voice, to play an active role in the changes that they want to see happening in their own backyards. You see the very physical presence of the arts through maker spaces that integrate itself out through these residential blocks. And as a direct result of that, you see beautiful murals that paint the sides of these row houses that speak to a changing identity, a more inclusive neighborhood that wants to welcome in people regardless of the things that they've been through in their lives. And most importantly, to the program of this shelter, just outside of this neighborhood, a couple blocks west of the site itself, we have the social work offices of Turnaround Incorporated. And this is a space where those first 90 days of work can actually occur and make it an easier transition for girls that are moving along this healing process. This design process began by looking at women's shelters around the world and looking at places that are designed for women who have experienced violence in their lives, places that work to empower the individual while creating a community of survivors. And so by studying shelters in Africa, the Netherlands, and Israel, I looked at that sequence of movement from the urban edge to the most sacred spaces, how program starts to interact with one another and how people interact with one another. Similarly, I also looked at student housing, spaces that follow a similar idea of wanting to empower the individual through the collective effort, and I looked at what those spaces are, where the individual and the collective come together, both here and abroad. And what I found with all of these precedents and the plethora of other precedents that I studied was that all of these, regardless of how they were designed, regardless of what culture it was in and who these were for, there was this constant idea of the oasis, a space that is at the core of all of these designs that is meant to foster interaction between individuals in order to build the collective spirit, not unlike the space that we're in right now. And so I started off by looking at the whole site as this oasis for these girls within this larger network within the city, protecting it, reintroducing the public through administrative spaces, social work spaces, bringing the neighborhood into the design with the addition of a makerspace, classrooms, spaces that are flexible and open enough that they can be used for academic or technical learning, but they can also be used to learn different types of life skills like self-defense. And then we have the home, detached from this set of the program so that the home remains the home, and it's just for these girls. It's a place that other people never really have to come back into unless they absolutely need to. And then 3 floors of housing, allowing for at any one time 24 girls to live within this shelter with 6 full-time live-in mentors. And then we stitch them together to find that balance between what is institutional, what is domestic, to bring the living and learning communities together and start building this relationship and bridging the gap between the public that is there to learn and help and the girls that are there to heal. And then the manifestation of healing itself through this group therapy space that stands as this icon within the garden as to celebrate the healing process a little bit, as well as stand as this lantern of hope within the garden as a natural extension of the home itself. This is a shelter that from the outside takes its cues from the Baltimore materials, the artistry found around this community, the row house rhythm to design those public faces. While on the inside, it creates its own little world that's just for these girls. So on the ground floor, you have all of the office spaces that look out into the garden so that they can continuously monitor activity without ever physically needing to be in that space. And you have a very open and flexible ground floor so that girls can continuously come together in group settings in the scale of group that they want to, while still being visually connected to each other and all of their surroundings. As we move up, we start to privatize these spaces a little bit more. So on the second floor, we introduce the family units, linked back to the learning environments, the classrooms, the makerspace. And then on the third and fourth floor of the home, we have the single units, once again attached back to the learning environments of the library on the third floor, and a meeting room, a place where girls can invite family and friends over and be together with them in their home without ever making the other girls in the shelter feel uncomfortable by bringing a stranger into their space. But the best way for me to explain this project to you is to take you through that experience, take you through that sequence of movement for a girl entering the shelter for the first time. And for that, I'd like to redirect your attention to the boards, and the perspectives will also be on the screen. When a young woman or girl enters the shelter for the first time, she walks in through the same entrance that social workers and teachers enter in through. So that first and foremost, she is met by the space that's there to hide her, that's there to protect her. And she's met with a social worker that will continue to be this mentor with her throughout her full journey here. And we're taking this idea of the false hope that she was continuously given her whole life and creating a constant figure of hope for her to bring along her journey. From there, she enters in through the everyday entrance of these girls with that figure. And she's able to begin this journey of healing, this journey of walking into the home for the first time with that constant figure. Through this entrance that both interacts with the wall that's there to protect her and the home and the garden that's there to heal her. From there, she is taken into the home and she's able to visually see how these communal spaces interact. And while she might not interact with the other girls on her first day or her first couple weeks in the shelter, she's able to see the future that lies ahead of her here. That these are also women who have gone through the same things in life that she has gone through. And yet, their past doesn't have to dictate who they are and who they want to be in their future. And that they can create this family of survivors, a family that many of these girls most likely never had. She's also able to see how the garden and the home start to interact with one another, and they become a part of this larger learning experience. So for example, you might see girls growing things out in the garden, then bringing it back into the kitchen to have a communal meal, to prepare a communal meal together, to learn how to value their bodies in a different way and build a healthier lifestyle. From there, as we move vertically throughout the spaces, we're continuously breaking down the scale of engagement, the scale of community, so that girls are given the constant opportunity and choice to be a part of the group setting that she wishes. So she might take place, or she might get to know the girls that live in her set of units within this lounge space that looks out into the garden that's meant for just her 5 units. Or she might go into the porch space, this threshold between the unit and the lounge, a place that's just for her and the girl that lives right next to her, and use this space as a stepping stone to getting to know the other girls on her floor and the other girls in her home. She's welcomed into her unit. Each of these units are designed as micro units, so not only are they extremely efficient, but they're also extremely flexible, allowing her to design this unit the way that she wants to. Because while this is not her permanent home, for the full time she is here, she should feel as though it is 100% absolutely hers, and in doing that, restoring some control back into her life. And once she begins to feel a little bit more comfortable in the home with these other girls, she might start opening up to these different learning environments. And coming from a world where she was continuously told that her only worth and only purpose in life is based on the worth put on her body by her trafficker, these spaces open up a world of opportunities for her. They show her the value of what lies out there for her, what else there is. They show her that she's worth more, that she can learn she's able to continuously learn new things about herself, develop new skills. And in doing that, understand that what people have told her she is in her past no longer has to dictate who she wants to be in her future. We come back to the garden, the therapy space that is meant for group therapy, so that girls can come together to reaffirm and understand each other's pain as a form of healing from it. It's a space that is immersed within the garden environment itself, so that this in itself becomes its own little oasis. And we have the garden itself, the space that ties all of these programs together, a place that acts as this natural protection for the girls, while simultaneously opening up to the sky to allow them to rise in a freedom that they're experiencing for the first time. While no space in the world will ever make these girls forget the things they've been through, after having been used their whole lives, by creating a place that exists solely to serve them and their needs, we can help them understand their true worth, make them feel human again. And in doing that, we can design a new life. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and comments.
Apparently you made a nice verbal presentation.
I guess so.
Wow.
I think you answered all the questions.
Lunchtime.
Lonna,
Oh,
what-
sorry, I forgot.
Oh my God, I didn't prepare any questions.
You should have taped that. That'd be a TED Talk.
I was going to say that I think that you have shown us a great ability to present a difficult idea, and you should think in actually making sure that this doesn't end here by using what you already have in a broader universe such as a TED Talk or something. You know how they happen, so if you don't know, just go to the place and you can actually propose themes. And so this would be a good idea. Let's get into your project and how it addresses the issues. And so, explain to me a little about how is the process of I'm not sure how to call it, but I'm going to call it reinsertion into the society, because basically they have been abstracted from society and use them, like literally use them in a very special way, making sure that they are again isolated. Remember, isolation is the beginning of everything that you can do with people that cannot be controlled. And so isolated So I imagine that this is more about reinserting them, and there's a process involved in which they will come here and they will feel safe, and then eventually, progressively, will be reinserted somehow. And you describe this as the third stage of the process that you had there. There's 2 stages before, in which they would need to be evaluated, and depending how difficult the case is, they will move to the next. I imagine in certain time, and so this is basically the last step before they're set. I can't even imagine how this is going to happen, to be honest. So this is a place that is meant to be safe, that represents safety, but eventually is going to be also the membrane by which they will filter out. Am I right in that?
So this is actually the one step before they have a full independence.
Okay.
In reality, there would probably be another shelter that's associated with this, where there would be more of a supported independency before they can actually reacclimate themselves into the community.
Because your imagery actually has something that to me it's already complex. I see children and I see young women. And so is this the way it would happen? Like you would put them together and they will, because it's such a difficult issue. I have no idea how this, and you didn't go through this, so how this actually happened.
So many of these girls will come into the shelter with a child already. So there are spaces that are designed just for them and to also make these kids feel like they're in a home, not in a shelter. And so the hope is that by having some of these family spaces already integrated throughout the home, that they're able to see how a family can actually be created, what normal relationships should actually be like. Because that's one of the biggest things that has been taken from these girls is the ability to interact with one another, to make relationships. So by adding in people who already have a strong bond, it sets a precedent for how people can actually come together.
And why your decision of actually, that something that makes even this more difficult, which is keeping them in an urban context, which is probably the context in which they have been exploited, right? Rather than abstracting them from the context that they probably associate with their awful life, and then perhaps progressively reinserting them in this. Why did you choose this kind of difficult? I mean, we're talking about Baltimore, for God's sake,
Yeah.
which is already a harsh place. And so you're putting it in a very urban context, and then your eyes are basically trying to protect it, but it's difficult to protect it. I will go to other places to that. So why do you choose this place?
So it was definitely a gentle balance in trying to find the right community. And so I knew that this was an interesting proposal because, like I said, many of these girls are either isolated, but they'll still be near a neighborhood, or many of these girls are literally put in row houses in Baltimore, and that's their shelter. So this was a way to find a balance between full isolation and then being put right into a row house. And so what I did to find the right community was extensive research on where these communities hope to see themselves in the future, and then actually going around and visiting them to do some qualitative research of my own. So this community was one of just a couple in Baltimore that actually kind of fit the criteria for the shelter. But it's definitely a difficult balance to find.
And I actually appreciate that. The fact that you don't keep them isolated, my question was tricky.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't keep them isolated is actually the step that we miss in some places where that interaction doesn't start to happen, and so it becomes the traumatic trunks eventually. And you are probably closer to sort of ease that step. So when I go to architecture, is that somehow reflected? And I can tell you things that I think about when I see. So you have these very, I guess, enticing place, which is a place where I would definitely feel safe. Out of rigid geometries and everything, but then as I go up to the more intimate spaces, I see the windows actually open upwards rather than how is this intentional?
So you mean the windows in the units
Yes.
themselves? So these windows are designed so that these girls can still have some access to the community. They're portals into the community itself, so they don't feel completely isolated at all times. But they're also meant to be just one larger window per unit so that they still feel secure, that they're not going to be attacked or taken in the middle of the night. But these are used in order to make that visual connection even in the most private spaces.
Would you have considered to actually have some at least facing inwards rather than outwards?
Yeah, I definitely looked at both.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I found that the interaction with the communal spaces in the garden led to more interaction than having the units switched and having those looking onto the garden.
Because I also think this is a process, you know, and perhaps your architecture could reflect that, where you have certain certain members that have been there shorter time in one location, then move to other places and then that interaction somehow it's encouraged by actually mixing them. So rather than having them differentiated by floors or anything, kind of mix them up. So the only thing that I have to be honest, I'm reading through architecture. I mean, you are the expert here in this, and I am aware of that. But the only thing I try to see through architecture that doesn't quite does that is that idea that there's a process involved in which I learn or relearn how, or actually learn for the first time, how to be a research in society as a productive member and not as an object of oh my God, pleasure or whatever. And I don't see that clearly reflected. And I wish actually that to be more, and perhaps it doesn't have to be. Perhaps this doesn't need to be other than just a safe door, which is what I see now. But I think that the process that you're describing is so powerful, so powerful that what I would like as an architect is actually see it reflected, very much as I see it reflected in some of the common spaces, but not so much in the individual spaces that you have there that become basically just bedrooms, nicely designed like great units, but basically, you know, individual spaces very common, and perhaps that's what they have to be. And I think that these are the things that you need to make sure that they're. I'm very drawn to the whole description that you have given. You were very powerful in the description, and I just want you to have equal success like presenting these ideas architecturally, because architecture has to speak about that. And those little things are still like, okay, but if it's like that, why is this not so clear? And so if it is about saying, you know, it doesn't need to be more than a door, then say it. Okay? But if there is something that could be done with architecture, then do it. And I don't know, you're the expert.
Very, very powerful presentation. Some of the things that you said that stood out to me were these women never having a chance to be a child, no consistency of environment, and this idea of isolation, right? And I can see the genesis or the stream of thought between those three sort of phrases and how you start to interpret the architecture from an urban standpoint. Not only do I like the choice of choosing an urban environment, but I actually like the sort of micro climate of choice of site, because not only did you choose an urban environment, but you chose one that is sort of on the come up, right? And an environment that, from a marketability standpoint, you know, you're going to get developers trying to come to this area, you know, try to capitalize on that area. And so you took the standpoint that I'm going to use this in the middle of a burgeoning neighborhood to try to rehabilitate people, to sort of reincorporate them in the best of ways, right, into a real neighborhood, which is what that entire area north of the police station, I think, is and is going to further become. But I want to question my only criticism, my initial criticism, is this idea of porosity. And I keep thinking back to sort of the complexity of the human condition and how people that have been through certain areas of trauma, how they sort of respond to that and how long or how quickly it takes them to assimilate to being a human being again, right? And so I look at the porosity of this image here, and then I also look at the porosity of what do you call it, the group therapy space, and I wonder if there doesn't need to be a little bit more opaqueness in terms of allowing people, these sort of damaged individuals, to sort of be within themselves in some moments within the architecture, right? Not allowing it to be this sort of completely porous sort of courtyard space where you constantly have a complete view of the individual. Because I imagine some of these girls rather, would like to be within themselves and to sort of meditate and kind of gather their thoughts and not want to be sort of an object of view all the time, right? I'm sure you considered that, but
Yeah.
what would you say to the argument of the porosity?
Yeah, sure. So with the therapy space, it's represented as being completely open, but in my mind, I was always thinking that this is something that could also be screened off for girls who want to attend therapy by themselves without being just that kind of fishbowl in the garden. And then for the actual home itself, this idea of being watched or looking out, the idea of behind these little threshold spaces or the porch spaces as I'm calling them, between the unit and the lounge space were to give this little bit of sense of privacy so that girls don't need to be watched as they're moving into their units, but they can be hidden away before they enter into the most private spaces. But I do think that there are some elements in the actual kind of elevation itself that could be a little bit more closed off.
I'm just wondering if there's a way, because having been part of this discussion for at least a semester, if there's a way to take these two observations and rethink the upper floors of the building so that there could be a bit more variety on the floors. So some of the units could actually come in and impact the curvaceous wall that lines the garden space. And by doing that, one could begin to maybe mitigate the effect of all this glazing surface, which by the way is facing south and west, which then has all these curves on it. I'm thinking of Disney Concert Hall, unintended consequences and stuff like that. But also then it might then allow for variety. So in a way, the upper floors are kind of a iteration of what's going on in the ground floor, where the garden and the ground plane actually invades the space, and there's a kind of metaphorical garden on the inside and a real garden on the outside. Then there might be some more opportunities for different types of encounters. It goes back to this, I'm an only child, so when people say to me, "Oh, Brian, you spend so much time at home alone," and they feel sorry for me, actually, I like that, right? So that time frame when you can retreat and be alone might be actually okay for some people in their development and their healing process.
So just continuing on that point just a little bit, I was very struck by your telling us that bar building was what protected the women. And when I look at the development of the architecture, that building seems to me to be articulated almost the same as the rest of the building. So specifically, you've got a very solid wall here, thick wall, and then you've got this very thin and substantial wall. And so I'm wondering two things. First of all, why isn't this considered a wall, and then people can inhabit it? Because I think that there is a less compelling need for this to have the courtyard view, and a more compelling need for the women's environment to have the courtyard view. So I think that if this building, the way it looked in your 3D view, really was that kind of solid sheltering thing, that wall that protects against the dangers, that would be perhaps a more powerful architectural expression of your very clear thinking. The other thing was the idea of the door or the portal. So this is really that stepping, out of one life into a new life, and so that the entrance into this complex is one door, and then that door that the women take between this very protected world and this kind of semi-public world. It seems to me that's an important door also. So I'm just looking for a little bit more articulation of that portal that the women can choose to pass through that's safe. Right, because I think that the doors are not particularly articulated. It seems very thin to me. And, on the one hand, I understand that, you want this to be welcoming and not threatening. But on the other hand, I think if I put myself in these women's place, that I would want to see this as something somehow strong that shaped me.
It's interesting, wonderful presentation, and again, another very poignant topic. But I was actually reading a lot of what has been talked about in your architecture, which is this is really nice to see, because a lot of times we have these social issues that are brought before us, and we're not really given the architecture that really backs that up. And so when I see your front facade, I see something that's scaled very intentionally to relate to the surrounding row house typologies, that is scaled to kind of provide an overarching kind of institutional framework, but then also recognize the individual kind of scale elements. And when I think about the whole process, it does seem to be very intentionally layered, from the kind of individual spaces to gradually more and more public spaces as you go toward that courtyard. So and perhaps it is layered, vertically as well, so that the lower levels are more protected and then the upper levels are more kind of open. And so I guess I'm defending. Feel free to jump in and defend yourself. But one more thing, I think just this idea that, the purpose of the building is really to kind of build self-worth, I think, and to build the skills, life skills and healthy habits and things that would allow people to be successful in the outside world. So, it is this kind of journey, and it is a kind of really difficult one. I think we shouldn't gloss that over, right? And so that's where the one thing where your architecture kind of lets me down is this curve that kind of illustrates to me this kind of journey. Where does it end, or where does it lead us? And I think, perhaps, I don't know, maybe I should let you answer that.
So everything that you said was accurate. So the curve, I think you're right that I could have absolutely thought of this more about that journey and where that journey ends and their time in this shelter. But my main thinking behind this was that we can use this interaction of this curve to have this interplay between the garden and home and blend those, or blur those boundaries a little bit, and then use those curves to create a sense of community with these lounge spaces that peek out into it as well. But I do agree that it could have been articulated in a way to represent that journey a little bit more specifically.
Lonna, congratulations on the work that you've done. It's been wonderful to see this project develop. I want to build on some of the comments about the architecture as well. And I think the notion of the process that people are going through, and that people are in different stages of this process, there are a couple of thoughts I had. One is about representation and the contrast between the images of the women in these, in your renderings, and the women we saw earlier, whose eyes are so dead. And I actually think if your representation showed women who still were like that, so you get the sense that not everybody has reached this sense, and also more women of color, given the population that we're talking about. But as it relates to the architecture, I'd like to go to the conversation about the entrance and also about the coming and going, right? So you speak about people entering and the first time, but I'd love for you to think about also, you're not going to stay here for 2 years, right? You're going to be moving out into the world and back in, and out and in. And so this notion of this kind of threshold, I think that could become more a part of your architecture, and I believe the entrance is still on the alley?
No.
Okay.
It's been moved. So the girls' entrance has been moved to the other side. So the alley is on the north end, and then there's actually just an open area that faces the side of a row house where the girls will enter in through, and then the main entrance or the public entrance is still off of the residential street of Barclay.
So a couple of questions about that.
Mm-hmm.
One is the girls' entrance, is it protected, right? And that wall that you have could, there's no eyes on that, right? So moving in from the outside world where someone could be stalking for them, waiting for them, like how can the architecture address that? And I think that wall and sort of the park in a certain way is very romantic, but may not be realistic. And then the other comment, I think Marcus may have raised this and Carlos raised it about the architecture and the kind of way in which it could feel unformed or changing. I was thinking a little bit about the program, that perhaps there's something that's neither kind of the wall of social services nor the resident, but perhaps if there's a cooking class or there's some kind of space that's about there being a place for interaction with the community, and that could potentially be near the entrance. And so it's also representative of this kind of stepping out, this link, which I wouldn't represent as two chains in the way you had it there. And so some other kind of program that talks about the process, but also could be situated at the entrance, and also perhaps offer kind of eyes on the street somehow during that time.
Sure. So
Over the 2 years, right, of people being in different stages.
Sure. So one of the things to speak to that idea, having a physical space where people can come together was this apartment building that's right behind the site itself is an affordable housing project for artists. And so one of the things I had in earlier iterations was a shared gallery space where these girls and the residents within that community could come together as artists. Since then, it didn't make its way to the final, but I'm sure that's something that could have.
I think that's a great start. I think you could also think about what are the kinds of things being learned in these classrooms that's starting to give people life skills.
Yeah.
So if there was, say, cooking, or if there was, you said they're learning computer skills, or just something where there's a kind of safe place in which there's a start of an interaction with the community where people might start working those skills. That's one idea. I'm sure you can think of others.
Definitely.
But I am concerned about what these entrances look like, and also the larger idea of threshold as architecture, but threshold in terms of moving back into this world, or moving into this world for the first time.
So to speak to the entrance a little bit, the idea between giving girls their own separate entrance into the home was, once again, to keep the home its home, but also my thought process was that people who might, if they are in worry that they might be stalked on the street or something, that this allows them to kind of slip past this main street of Barclay, of Fremont West, and then enter in kind of hidden away. And then, so I guess that was my main thinking there, that you can separate that.
They're hidden, but they're also no one looking out for them. Right?
How do you actually get there?
And here, so this is the main street of Barclay, and then there's an open plot of
So
grass.
just walking through grass.
Yeah, so there's a-
defined path.
Right. Then there would be a
So
gateway threshold that
I
would be
think you could
monitored.
take your clue from schools,
Mhm.
where the office is right near the entrance. And if this room was open to the street and had someone here all the time and greeting people, and there was a desk, that it's not slipping in, that there needs to be some kind of protection, and there could be some kind of community activity here also,
Yeah.
right? So. Once we confirm.
Wow. So, amazing work. First of all, I think you resolve very well the issue for different aspects. Let's start with the first aspect that I really was falling in love, because I really like the typology that you choose. So you're talking about garden, actually works much more as a courtyard. You're talking about row houses, actually to me works more appropriate word is palazzo. And this block, this palazzo, has incredible value in terms of also perception, in terms of sense of safety from outside, A lot of organic transparency open inside of the courtyard. That reminds me a lot of the Florentine Palace. If you think about Palazzo Strozzi, Palazzo Medici Riccardi, they need to design something safe for bankers outside, but completely transparent inside around the courtyard. So my first question is how much your Florentine experience was bring here?
Yeah. Well, to answer that, I actually, after I developed the main party of this oasis of the garden, I was led to studying many different palazzos and mosques. So looking at a conversation I had with Professor Kelly quite a bit, and I think you can see a couple of the sketches down here, was how with the palazzo you have this very strong face of this rusticated stone face that faces the public, and then on axis that's the place just for the people that are living there, especially like Palazzo Medici. You have the courtyard, that's just for them. And then I also looked at mosque types where the courtyard is less on axis, but it's a type of space where you have to move around and meander to find those courtyard spaces. So my Florentine experience did go quite a bit into this.
And another aspect that I really like that you resolve very well in terms of functions, but also in terms of sustainability, climate issues. You have the sequences of a buffered zone. You have a porticos, you have a multifunctional flexible space before to arrive outside. So there's a kind of this project also you can read by layers, like the vertical layers. I think is very smart and very successful. Also the corner solution in your facade is another way to deal with the context with the next building. But I agree with you. Probably one of the weakness, could be here or could be here just to control. Mm-hmm. And another aspect that you can develop maybe could be also this element here. Mm-hmm. Because this could be an entrance, but could be also in a street. Mm-hmm. So that could be something that because when the ladies, the women are ready to go back to the real life, so I think it's important also to give a more relationship with external conditions. So that could be as the Florentine Palace, the opportunity to have not just one entrance way, but another one with a control. But I really, really like the relation.
Well, I want to thank Lonna for bringing this project to the school, and I think all of the comments and the critiques were well received. I think it is a testament to the maturity of the design that we can have some of these discussions about things like security and facade development, and we can reinforce some of the comments that were made about really what you were saying matched with how the project is being read and understood. And even back to the first comments about the site selection, whether it was appropriate to put this in an urban environment or to extract this community that needs to be healed out to an ex-urban environment, which I don't think would have been the right thing to do. I'm glad it's in the city and near that I-95 corridor that is one of the manifestations of this problem. But more than any of those comments about the specific project, it was a really wonderful experience to sit on this committee with Lonna. And it's not every thesis where the student has a really clear goal and command and intentionality and direction about the topic that they're investigating and then how they're going to do that. And so for all the students out there, I would pay attention to that. And thank you for taking us on this journey.
Thank you.
I want to add something to that. Lonna had the Florentine experience and came back and did an internship scholarship last summer with Design Collective, and for the students out there, both the Florentine experience, the internship, the scholarship with Design Collective, really amped you up and got you ready to go. I just want to go back to that presentation. I sat over here, I leaned over to Professor Hurt, and I said, this is an unbelievable presentation. And you really did exactly what we've been asking students to do, which is to tell a compelling narrative around your thesis topic. And I really think this is important. And a lot of people said, oh, this should be a TED Talk. What's really beautiful is you were here, it was real, this was live, it was, you can do this kind of thing. And so I think, I'm glad we've captured it in some regard. It should become a TED Talk. But what's very important is it reveals something, Lonna, about you, which is the incredibly high level of leadership potential you have. I just emailed that back to Design Collective. So you better negotiate a raise.